Chapter 11. The Imperial Capital of Lokvakar. It was the city without a map. The positions of structures that comprised it, unanchored by ground or land, rolled in a state of constant flux around the curves in space created by gravity. Only the Spodek Vilra Rock Imperial Capital Transport Office had a grasp of their positions at any given moment, yet the next moment they would be somewhere else entirely anyway. That was why the city was called the Biratek Nigina, turbulent capital. Another of its names was the Sath Nochair, root of the dragon's heads, for the Gofnosh on the crest of the empire was also a metaphor for the empire. The 8 monarchies and the bill, routes, ran through them were often likened to the 8 heads of the Nochek, dragon. And no other place could be said to be where those heads were joined. Yet another of the city's monikers was the decidedly more straightforward Biratek Asadar, capital of 8 gates. There were multiple star systems with more than one gate, but only one with as many as 8 in human-inhabited space. In the distant past, a millennium ago by the city's time, 8 closed gates once scattered across the vast reaches of space were born here by colossal starships and summarily opened. Further, it was dubbed the Jersage Freibearer, Cradle of the Empire, for the greatest empire humankind had ever seen, an empire whose history would be tinged with blood and fire, traced its beginnings here. It was through that ghastly history that they earned the name Doetsariak, those that succumb not. Many a time, the capital opened war with haughty arrogance, even in the face of likely defeat, and many a time, they watched the propelling flames of enemy ships as they sailed away. But in the end, those enemies didn't undergo any infamous fall. Even the nations that made it all the way to invading the capital simply became the blood and bones of the empire, long-lived and triumphant. Biratek Niger, another such sobriquet, meant capital of love. Opportunities for brushes with romance were few and far between for a race that spent their days aboard interstellar ships and in orbital estates, and who were thinly scattered across a whopping range. As such, it was customary to spend half of one's life in this metropolis. In Lokvakar, open invitation banquets were always being held somewhere, and the Ov searched for a lover with whom the sparks reached supernova intensity. Of course, more than a few simply referred to the city as Muratek, home space. A majority of Ovs were the products of an explosive love triggered in the city. They were born here, scattered across the galaxy wide, and then one day returned. The turbulent capital and 2, the root of the dragon's heads. The capital of 8 gates and 2, the cradle of the empire and 2, the home space of those that succumb not. These all were Lokvakar, and Lokvakar was all these. The name of the imperial capital's son was Avriel. So too the city ship their founding ancestors lived on, the surname of the emperor, and the star that illuminated their home were all called. When the group of people that birthed the Ov, who could be called their indirect ancestors, lived off the land on their bow-shaped island chain, not yet having unraveled the secrets of the gene or the mysteries of the heavens above, the name of the sun goddess they worshipped, Amaterasu, shifted drastically over the ages, ending up as Avriel. This star system was therefore also known as the Drohinablierser, Avriel Countdom. Incidentally, the title of Dryor Avriel Ser, Count Avriel, was always held by the current emperor. As for Avriel the sun, those who drew closer could view the globular basket encompassing it. The spaces punctuating its trihexagonal tiling mesh were large, but the mesh itself was made of thin fibers. Thin, that is, in comparison to the star itself. More precisely, the band-like structures spanned 500 ustag in width. The sides of the bands facing the sun were solar batteries, and the opposite sides contained countless linear accelerators which produced antimatter fuel without pause. It constituted the largest antimatter fuel factory in not just the empire, but the known universe. The imperial capital measured 300 sadak in diameter, was shaped much like a sickle, and orbited at a distance of 6 sadak from Avriel. The Rubiak Imperial Palace, the royal palaces, the Garrick Iraq orbital estates in the capital, of grandees, the Bach, joined residences of gentry and imperial citizens, the Deb, space gardens, the Ileb, shopping halls, the Star Forces facilities, the Locker, warship construction sites. It was a gathering of these kinds of artificial planetoids and more. Innumerable transport ships, as well as interstellar ships coming from flat space, soared through the city. Each facility possessed a measure of maneuverability and avoided collision automatically. The 8 gates were evenly spaced in orbit 100 Sadak out from Lokfakar, each accompanying a Lanida Koka, orbital fort, and revolving in the opposite direction relative to the capital. Emerging now from one of those 8, the Sadak Ilich Gate, the communications ship the Akril carried Lafier and Jinto into the Avriel Countdown. Communications ships were different from connecting vessels in that they were constructed more like small-scale cargo passenger ships. Since they were meant to carry guests and messengers in addition to information, the ship contained 12 rooms furnished with sanitary facilities, as well as a common room of modest size. Jinto, who was busy doing absolutely nothing in the living room, took a peek into the common room to find Lafier there, much to his surprise. She was rarely there. "Hey, report finished yet?" "Yep." Lafier looked over her shoulder, pointing at the big screen in front. "What's your impression of Lokfakar?" The home space was there to see. It was the first time Jinto had laid eyes on such a cluster of lights. Splendorous and manifold of color, the array almost literally dazzled. With the ship and Lokfakar's orbits coplanar with each other, it struck him as though he were viewing a galaxy from the side. "It's even more amazing than I was expecting." "I see," said the royal princess, with a smile of unvarnished delight. Jinto grabbed himself some coffee and took the seat beside her. Regarding his first impressions of Lokfakar, Jinto certainly hadn't lied. Yet a different emotion entirely was currently taking up his heart. Loneliness. He'd taken quite the detour, but here at last he'd reached the imperial capital from the Vorlash Countdown. And now his journey was drawing to a close. This meant goodbye. He and Lafier would part, and there was no guarantee they'd ever see each other again. On top of that, Lafier had holed herself up saying she needed to write the report, spending time with him almost only during meals. The feeling wasn't pleasant. "Did the Manuas commander inform you?" asked Lafier. "Of what?" "We are proceeding toward the Imperial Palace." "What, directly?" Jinto was surprised. "Yep. It appears Her Majesty the Empress wishes to speak of many things." "Speak to you mean?" "Not just me. She wishes also to speak to you, it would seem." "Whoa, Nelly," Jinto tensed. "You're laying that on me like it's no big deal. Though I guess to you, she's your grandma." "A year has passed since last I met Her Majesty." "Yeah? Must be tons you want to talk to her about then." "There is much to discuss, yes, but Her Majesty must be busy with all of her duties. In case you've forgotten, the Empire is currently at war." I know. Heard anything about how the war's shaping up?" "No, I'm out of the loop as well." She leaned her head in. "Worried?" "Course I am. Have you forgotten where my home planet is?" Not far from the field of battle lay the Countdom of Hyde, whose residents continued to call Jinto, heir to the traitor. The Illich monarchy was shaped like a ring, so contact wouldn't be severed immediately, but if it ever got annexed like the Svagov Marquisate did, well, even just thinking about it chilled the nerves. The people of his homeland would probably be far more amenable to an occupying army than the terrestrial citizens of Svagov were. He kept picturing, despite himself, what sort of treatment his father, the Count of Hyde, might receive at their hands. Though they hadn't met in years, and they'd never been very close, he was still his one and only blood relative. Right. Lafier's expression turned uncomfortable, embarrassed. "Forgive me my foolish question." "It's all right. I myself forgot all about it while we were on Klasbule. We were fairly occupied, to say the least." "You know, sometimes you really put things super mildly," said Jinto, in admiration. The lights of the capital approached, closer and closer, and the nearest structure came into focus. A set of spheres were stacked together, and they made a giant tube wriggle like a tentacle. It lent the appearance of a strange life form that had reached an evolutionary dead end. "It's the Bader warship construction site. The patrol ship Gosloth was born there," said Lafier. "Interesting. See that?" Lafier pointed at the spheroid beyond the site. "That's a Sodmarin baby nursery. There are a few of them around home space." Inside, It's near weightless due to microgravity, the lining is soft, and foam stars are floating in the air. A while after birth, babies are given circlets and dropped there. That's how they learn the law of action and reaction, and how to use their circlets. If an ov doesn't experience this during the developmental period, their brain's Rilbadoc navigational area will never form. As Jinto nodded and interjected to indicate to Leifir that he was listening as she began to describe the sights to see in the capital, he inwardly wondered whether she felt any sorrow over their imminent parting, and if she would express reluctance to leave him. When they arrived at the imperial palace, chamberlains who were stern of feature pulled Jinto away from her. Due to his experience in the Febdash barony, he grew apprehensive, but his fears proved groundless. He was led to a grand and extensive lavatory, in whose warming waters he stretched out. After a thorough cleanse, he exited the lavatory to find a change of clothes already prepared for him. Just as the army medic had predicted, his shoulder had completely healed. The hole had closed up with new skin, and the bones were devoid of pain. He donned a jumpsuit with the hems of its sleeves at the shoulders, as well as a long robe, as usual. A circlet identical to the one that had been stolen from him at the barony and a compuwatch to replace the one he'd borrowed from Selnai also lay for the taking. After putting on the full attire of an of noble, Jinto gave the sign just as he'd been instructed. "Please come with me," said a chamberlain who'd arrived at his summons, standing at attention to guide his way. A movable podium awaited him in the hallway. "You may get on." "Okay." Jinto stepped up onto it, and the chamberlain got on after him to input orders into its console. Where are we going?" asked Jinto timidly as the podium took off. "To the waiting room of the audience chamber." "The audience chamber? But I thought it's only used for important events." "That is correct." "So, what's on today?" The chamberlain looked back, dark blue eyebrows raised. "Are you honestly unaware?" "Know what? Forget I said anything." He was happy so long as his astuteness level was deemed higher than a cyanobacterium's. "Quit your fidgeting, Jinto," Leifir frowned. She'd arrived at the waiting room before him and was sipping out of a glass. "Sometimes you demand stuff that's easier said than done," said Jinto, whose nerves were not so readily dispelled. "I've got no idea what the proper protocol is. Are there, special manners to this, or? It's not such a big deal. Just be at your most polite, as common sense dictates." "Come on, I can't have you forgetting that I'm not exactly an expert on common sense." "Then do as I do. We shall walk up to the throne, make a deep bow, and wait until we're greeted." It could hardly be simpler. "Does sound pretty simple," Jinto admitted. "Because it is." A chamberlain entered the room. "Thank you for waiting, Fi Lanyu. All preparations have been made." "Yes." Jinto made to walk over to the chamberlain. "Not there. Over here." Leifir pointed to the giant doors. "Look at me, messing up before it's even begun," Jinto muttered. "Walk alongside me and match my pace." "Ah, right. Got it. You ought to hold your head up high. You're a hero, after all." "Well, that's the first I've heard of that. You're such an idiot." The big doors opened. The soft light of morning bathed the audience chamber. Basking directly in the rays of Avriel, it played across the room resplendent. A number of beams spanned the ceiling, but without a roof to support. Instead, one could view the bright blue sky, for a Knobetsiak, scattering surface, splayed above them. From the beams hung crest banners, the flags of the grandees that made up the empire. Jinto noticed the brand new crest banner of the Count Dom of Hyde all the way in front. Rows of Sachadar, NCC guards of honor, one to the left and one to the right, were standing straight with a dignified air. They trod across the black marble floor, approaching the throne as they did so. Sach Arab Hotre, Army Music NCCs, played the Ruel Imperial Anthem. The lyrics of the anthem weren't being sung, but Jinto knew them. They heralded eternal prosperity for the empire and expressed its determination to live to be at the bedside of a dying cosmos. In its arrogance and temerity, it was a very odd anthem indeed. Since Jinto hated the idea of bungling this like he had when he first met Leifir, he'd tried his best while still in the communications ship to memorize the faces of the distinguished people he might encounter. Thanks to those efforts, he could distinguish the faces of the three people standing before them. The one who stood up from the jade throne, its back to the crest banners of the 8 royal families, which surrounded the still larger imperial flag, was of course none other than Her Majesty the Empress Lamans. The man with blue, gray hair, standing on the right and a step below the throne, was Leifir's father, Larth Cryb Fi de Björter, his Hignus de Buzek, King of Cryb. Below him smiled a handsome indigo-haired boy. He could only be Leifir's younger brother, Bear Umdazer Fi Duhir, His Highness Duhir, Viscount of Days. Jinto felt disoriented. Though they were the Empress and the King of Cryb, he couldn't see them as anything but Leifir's siblings, so young they looked. At the same time, his brain categorized the Cryb King as being older than the Empress. On an intellectual level, he understood the Ov didn't physically age past a certain point, but seeing it in person threw him for a loop. How did the Ov themselves deal with this headache? Leifir knelt upon the white carpet below the tiers leading to the throne. Jinto hastened to follow her example. "Stand, Yarluk Dryor," intoned a nearby voice. When he looked up in surprise, he found Llamas had descended from the throne to stand right in front of him. "On your feet," she prompted. "Yes." Jinto got back up. "You will accept the thanks of the Avriel Yarluk." "This girl," she said, pointing to Leifir, "is nobody quite yet, but she holds much potential. And you are the one who safeguarded that potential and brought it home safely. If it hadn't been for you, we would have never gotten another chance to see this hatchling alive." Jinto turned red. "But I didn't do anything. I was the one who got rescued, time after time." "Not so, Yarluk," said Llamas, taking his hand. "Seeing as you may very well not have realized it, we do not think you are deliberately lying. Yet had you not rightfully told her to retreat when you did, she would have pressed on without ever ceasing, and fallen as a result. Though it may be in the nature of this clan of ours to misread when to withdraw, that disposition is particularly pronounced in this young one. Furthermore, you are an Ov that knows the ways of terrestrial worlds. Without that special and rare quality, it's not clear what fate she would have met." She stared back at him at close quarters, her comely countenance so like Leifir's, her red-brown eyes radiating gratitude. While the Empress's hands felt pleasantly cool, there was also, somehow, a warmth to them. Jinto was disconcerted, abashed. "Allow me to express my gratitude as well," Yarluk said dubious. "To us who have first drawn breath in Lokvakar, terrestrial worlds are strange lands with strange skies. The majority of us were born in the Ov world and die in the Ov world without ever having so much as set foot on a planet's surface. I don't mean to offend you, but to state the unvarnished truth, we're afraid of surface worlds, Count Air. I can't begin to express how thankful I am for bringing her back from one." Daringly, Jinto rebutted. "There are people on terrestrial worlds with their hearts in the right place, and without their help, we would have gotten captured by the enemy." "You misunderstand, Yarluk," Debius smiled. "I'm not saying we think people on terrestrial worlds are typically wicked, or any such thing. In fact, when it comes to wickedness, we don't plan to be outdone by anybody. The fact is that Lander and Ov lifestyles are extremely different, and the clash of cultures can easily result in people slain. Moreover, that land was ruled over by people who detested us as vermin. If you weren't there to serve as a mediator, then my daughter wouldn't be standing here today." "He speaks the truth, Yarluk," said Llamas. "I have already read the Royal Princess's report. As such, I know of the people who ended up saving you two on the terrestrial world. They, too, have earned my everlasting thanks. However, now is the time for you to be acknowledged. But she saved me just as much, especially when we were in space. That was the mission that Lexio had entrusted to her." At her name, a brief flash of sorrow flitted across his flawless features. "Yarluk, you're unaccustomed to the spacefaring world. My daughter was ordered to help you cross that unfamiliar world. By that same token, no one ordered you to help her cross the terrestrial world. You must credit yourself the venerableness of your deeds," Yarluk said Llamas firmly. "At least as of now, to us, there can be no nobler act. Please allow me to give you my thanks, too." Lani Yarluk Dryor cut in Duhir, his manner humble. "I'm so happy you've reunited me with my sister." When Duhir offered his frank, unaffected vote of thanks, Jinto's heart was finally soothed. The gratitude of the Empress and King was so lofty that try as he might, it didn't feel real or deserved. While their sentiments had come through, he felt so out of place that the back of his mind insisted they must be alluding to some other Jinto. "I am honored, Fee," he said, bowing his head. "Irremitten, Fee Larcher, your praises are very generous, and I am most flattered and obliged." "That's just how honorable you were, Jinto," whispered Leifier. "Carry yourself bolder, more confidently. Am I coming across that nervous?" He thought he was already doing everything he could to uphold his dignity, so he was reluctant to go over the top. "Yes. You're so blue in the face one would think you're being denounced." "Far Frymek, my daughter, my love, your report has a glaring omission," said Debius, with an amused look. "You failed to mention how close you've become with Lonnie Yarluk Dryor. Can you blame me, after all the perils we've faced, father?" Leifier replied. "No, I cannot," he said, though his devilish grin persisted. "What say you and I go on a walk, Leifier? It's been a while." "Leave us for the moment, Leifier," said Lamech, her tone pensive. "It appears we have an unpleasant duty to attend to. You are to follow us, Yarluk Dryor." "Yes. What's this about an unpleasant duty? We must be the bearer of bad news." Leifier followed her father, treading across white sand. Pure, clear water formed a streamlet over the sandbed. Suffused with soft, reflected light, the walls and ceiling also gleamed white, bereft of even a single blemish. All over the handful of white columns, glyphs were written in minuscule text. Since they weren't inlaid, they couldn't be read except up close. They were the names of those who had died for the sake of the Empire, engraved in order of passing without regard to social status, and, in the case of simultaneous death, in alphabetical order. Sufficiently close inspection would turn up people with the surname Avriel amongst the names of the various gentry and imperial citizens. In addition, one phrase was engraved at the top of each of the stone pillars: "Freiberek Adal Fernid, the Empire shall not forget thee." This was the Great Fronatara, Hall of Remembrance, the most sacred room to the race that ridiculed all religions. Dubious halted in front of one of the pillars. "I forget, did I welcome you back yet?" "No. You have not graced me with your words of welcome yet," she answered. "Then welcome back, Dorfermek, prodigal daughter. I'm glad you made it home." Dubious looked back. "Your flesh may remain young, but your mind and spirit will age with time. Even as an Ov, whose body will stay youthful to your dying day, your true youth will be over in the blink of an eye. And I'm wrestling with that reality as we speak. You've been through quite the valuable experience, and all during your true youth at that." Debius looked back at the pillar and stared at one name in particular. Leifier got closer to see it for herself. "Lekshawef Lobert Plakia. There's something else I've neglected to tell you, Farnay, my love. I didn't alter your genes. You're all natural. That is why your Avriel ears are so small." Leifier looked up. "But why do such a thing?" "Because there was no need to alter them, of course. Placiac just so happened to give me a wonderful gift, and with my level of talent, if I had adjusted your genes, there was no way I could make you even more beautiful than you already were." "Father, I'm not sure I understand why," she said, confused by her own feelings, "but hearing that makes me happy." Debius laughed lightly. "Is that right? Then I'm glad. I'd been under the impression that you resented me about your ears." "In truth, I did, somewhat," Leifier confessed. "Well, I suppose that was inevitable, Nuon, beauteous one." On that note, Dubius fell silent, fixing his eyes on the name engraved on the pillar. Leifier too stood there, quietly gazing with her father. "It was a glorious time," spoke Dubius at last. "Right by a dying giant star, and also at the edge of an event horizon, and even in a nebula in the midst of becoming a star. Plakia and I loved each other, and we would use each other's privileges, and we'd annoy each other in grandiose fashion." "Privileges? You mean to annoy the other?" "No, to be annoyed." A faint little smile floated to his lips. "I'm relieved, Asajek, little baby. You're still too young to fall in love." "Am I really?" Leifier reacted sharply, but she couldn't issue a retort. "When that marvelous time began to pull away from me, I couldn't believe it. But despite my disbelief, I could feel it in my bones. I could practically hear the sound of the footsteps as those days slipped away. That's why I, at the very least. Father, don't tell me, doubt welled within her heart. You aren't saying that you birthed me as a memento of sea placer, Lady Plakia, surely. Was that wrong of me? Dubious traced Lekshi's name with a finger. Back then, Plakia was my everything. Tell me, Syriac, Shining One, is it not a matter of course to always want a keepsake on hand of such a splendid moment? I am not a memento, father. Nor am I a copy of sea placer. Her doubt had turned to wrath. Of course, my little Lorasek Iserhot, slave to fury. You are different from her. Plakia was bright. She would never raise her voice for no reason. For no reason. Leifir's anger only increased. I am who I am. To think I thought you loved me for who I am. I do love you. If I didn't, then why would I call you my love, said Dubious, unperturbed. You love me solely as an echo of sea placer. Wrong again. I love you for you, Nak Abriarser, Avriel Flower. I don't believe you, father. I didn't think you would, Klazanon Nua, headstrong beauty. But know this, you were born as a Uboedek placer, memento of Plakia, but grew into my love. As you are now, you look just like her, but inwardly you're totally different. I'll refrain from telling you how exactly you're different from her. It's true that in the past, my love passed through you and flew to Plakia, but I no longer see her behind you. Leifir was far from convinced. She had respected Hecto-Commander Lekshu as a person and as a star pilot. She had looked up to her. Yet, she wanted her father to acknowledge her as a person in her own right. And though he was telling her he did think of her as her own person, she couldn't think of that as anything other than a smokescreen. Please tell me, was it your idea that I be placed in Lady Plakia's ship, father? I suppose calling it a coincidence would be too much. I wanted her to polish the treasure I raised, my lamb, Ruby. I may be a reserve soldier, but I am technically an associate commodore in rank, so I do have some lobbying clout. Dubious briefly became lost in thought. I suppose I won't be a reserve for much longer. War is upon us now. And I shudder to think that I might be placed under a certain laddie of the royal family of Bars. Laddie? But I thought you and Fi Larderbarkoer, His Highness the King of Bars, were the same age, said Leifir, half without thinking. I was born from the artificial womb 3 months ahead of him. It makes a world of difference. When we were young, I would always win whenever we fought. Never mind that, father. A fresh new seed of doubt had sprouted. Were you behind Jinto getting on the Gosloth too? Yep. It was mostly coincidental, though. There were as many as 15 ships fit for Yarluk Dryor to ride. I pushed her ship to be the one from behind the scenes. I'd thought you ought to have at least one friend from a terrestrial world, though I could never have imagined you'd grow that close. I'm beginning to think you were the force behind everything, even maybe the united humankind's invasion. Then you overestimate me, daughter of mine. If I guided the enemy or some such, then your grandmother would rip me limb from limb. Perhaps so, but you're taking measures where I can't see in order to mold me. Leifir didn't much care for that fact. Because I am your parent. I received half of Plakia and sired you, then raised you by myself. But that too is now over. You are already a Friam Frybearer, daughter of the Empire. Is that so? Leifir stared at Dubious's profile with eyes of incertitude. She was a fantastic woman, said Dubious, ignoring his beloved child's misgivings as he steeped himself back into reminiscence. When I first met her, I was a Deca commander with a poor record, and she was a Lie-Wing star pilot with a bright future ahead of her. I can think of 100 reasons she had me spellbound, but I still can't think of a single reason she fell for me. It must have been the royal fee in your title. Leifir surprised herself. She herself had little idea why she'd blurted something so mean. It was most likely her anger toward her father. Dubious looked back at her. The way his eyes were narrowed spoke volumes of his ire. Leifir's father stood out among his clan as a relatively calm and gentle sort, but even so, he was still an Avriel. You've known Plakia since you were a baby. You've even been on her ship. Yet I see you would appraise the woman who is half of you as one blinded by social status, Avrielsek ne Dubersker Bear Parian Lamhair. Answer carefully. No, Leifir hung her head. She was not that kind of person. For a short while, Dubious observed his daughter. He sensed her true remorse. Very well, on, blockhead. See to it you don't spout such nonsense again. Yes, Leifir couldn't bring herself to lift her face. Please, just tell me one more thing. Do you know what Lady Plakia thought of me? I do. She once wrote to me that she was proud of you. Proud of me. The old days she spent with Plakia came flooding to mind. Vivid memories of the woman that held a position in her life that on most terrestrial worlds would be called mother. Fun, happy memories. Suddenly, her vision turned blurry, and some warm liquid streaked down her cheeks. Are you weeping, Leifir? Noticed dubious. I'm not crying because you scolded me, she said through her convulsive sobbing. It was as though she'd regressed to her days as an infant. Then are you weeping over Plakia's death? Leifir couldn't speak, so frantic was she to curtail her sobbing fit. She simply nodded wordlessly. I'm disappointed in you. It seems I've raised you wrong. But his tone was full of affection, come to think of it. This may be the first time you've cried since you were in nappies, Soccerganina, steel heart. Dubious pulled Leifir into his arms. Listen, Leifir. Our clan has a reputation to protect. We Avriels are ruthless. We Avriels are callous. We Avriels wouldn't raise an eyebrow if death were to snatch away our closest friends and most intimate lovers. If it ever came out that an Avriel shed a tear or two, what would become of the infamy our ancestors carefully built? I don't care if you rage. You may even laugh and smile from time to time. However, no one born in Avriel has the right to weep. Even amongst fellow relatives, you cannot let your guard down. If you really must cry, do so in secret. It's not fair, father. Her tear-stained face looked at him from his breast. What isn't? You never taught me how to cry without shedding tears. In the room to which the Empress accompanied Jinto, a man in military uniform waited at attention. She introduced him. This is Vice Hecto Commander Burskath of the Military Command HQ Information Department. Vice Hecto Commander, explain the current situation to Yarluk Dryor Hader. Understood. A map of flat space projected in the center of the room. It included all sectors as yet known to humanity. The vicinity of the Svogov Marquisate suddenly turned red. This is where the engagement took place. I believe you're already aware, but the Star Forces prevailed and recovered the Svogov Marquisate. Then, a red blip appeared between the Svogov Marquisate and the Vorlash Countdom. This is Gate 193 of Seishu. It was the entry point of the invasion. The reconnaissance half-fleet Ftun carried out reconnaissance in force. A red dotted line extended from Gate 193, dividing the Illich monarchy as it stretched. The gates that the dotted line intersected turned into red glints. The enemy has made the gates in the area into temporary military operation bases, totally blockading any and all passage. Of course, if that was all, the Star Forces would be able to break through with ease. The problem lies here. Now another area within the Illich monarchy, on the far side of the Svogov Gate as viewed from Lokvakar, shifted red. Its borders were indistinct, but it included several gates. Then a red arrow emerged, advancing fiercely toward the Sadek Illich Gate, the entrance to Lokvakar. The enemy aimed for the capital with 120 half-fleets. Their actions on Svogov must have been a diversion. While we surmised as much, we never dreamed they would make another place in the very same monarchy their invasion's point of entrance. Now a blue arrow arose from the Illich Gate to collide with its blue counterpart. We responded in kind, and under the command of Fi Glaherer Rubirer, Their Highness the Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Fleet, counterattacked with 140 half-fleets. And though we succeeded in repelling the invasion, it was not without a great number of casualties. We have lost many talented men and women and many ships. The map disappeared. That is all we have established as of this point in time. Earlier, it was reported that the Imperial fleet is in pursuit, conducting reconnaissance around the entrance point. It must be said that the enemy cannot be failing to fortify their defenses in the area, however. Meanwhile, we don't have enough resources to initiate large-scale military action. That is because we must send troops to defend the remote regions and search with great care for other entrance points that may exist, all while planning the reconstruction of the Star Forces. It will take a minimum of 3 years to break down the 2 walls that now divide the Illich monarchy. Beyond those walls, there is only a single half-fleet to contend with. Even then, It's only really a half-fleet if they mobilize, as they are troops without a unified chain of command. They would be helpless before a full-fledged offensive. Jinto reflected on what it all meant. The Kingdom of Hyde, too, lay beyond the walls. "It is extremely unfortunate, Yarluk Dryor," said the Empress dolefully. "It's a shame that in exchange for the good news you brought us, we must give you such deplorable news. It was a failure on the part of the Empire, and now there are no words we can offer to rationalize it. Yet the facts are the facts, and we cannot expose the entire Empire to danger in order to save a part of it. All contact with your territory nation has been severed, and we do not see it being recovered in the near future." Jinto was stunned. Not only had all links to his birth planet of the Kingdom of Hyde been taken from him, but also those to his second homeland, the Kingdom of Vorlash. His entire past was now sectioned off. And yet, shockingly, he felt not an ounce of sorrow. Jinto reacted to his lack of an emotional reaction with trepidation and confusion.